Okay, so hi and welcome everyone. Welcome to MuleSoft Mysore group. Okay, so today we are having the topic unlocking seamless end-to-end automation with the MuleSoft automation suite. So that includes our Anypoint platform, Composer, and RPA. Okay, so before we start with the presentation, let me introduce you to the organizers. Myself, I'm working as a like integration developer in Danium. I'm a MuleSoft ambassador. Okay, and Giri is working as a senior technology architect in Hasdin. He's also an ambassador. And lastly, Priya, she is working in LTM entry and she's a mentor. Okay, so over to you, Kritika.
Yes, thank you, Shubham. So let me share my screen. So I hope you are all able to see my screen.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, then. Yeah. So a quick introduction about myself before we move on to the actual topic for today. So my name is Kirutika Nityanandan. I work as an RPA consultant at Lehman Pioneers Digital. So we are a consulting company based out of Germany, and we do consulting in a lot of topics, also including process intelligence and automation. I personally have 10 plus years of experience in software development and testing on a wide variety of topics. And the last 4 years, I've mainly been working on RPA and automation topics. Before this, I was working for SAP as a full stack application developer. Yeah, that's a short introduction about me. And again, thanks again for joining this session. And I hope this session is useful for you. And I would like to make it as interactive as possible. So if you guys have any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question. And if not, just put it in the chat and we will try to answer it then when we have a short break. This would be our plan for today's session. First, we would be starting with an overview of what does a MuleSoft automation package include and what are the different tools inside and how each tool is supposed to be used. And then we would move on to see the various interaction mechanisms that are possible between these tools, and we would be looking at each combination specifically in detail. And then we would be moving on to the most interesting part, which is the demo, where we will be showcasing a use case which is automated end to end using a combination of automation, Anypoint platform, RPA, and Composer. And then we would have some time for questions. And if there is still time left, then some networking as well. So then moving on to the first topic, which is the MuleSoft platform overview. So what do you get when you buy the MuleSoft automation package? So you get a combination of three tools, which is the MuleSoft Composer, MuleSoft RPA, and the Anypoint platform. A combination of these three tools will enable not just the IT department in an organization to automate their processes, but also their business departments in order to create their own automations. But at the same time, it will allow IT to have the full governance and the visibility of every automation and integration that is being created within an organization, right? So you, when you get the MuleSoft automation package, you have you're not just tied down to one tool, but you can decide based on the use case that you want to automate or integrate, which among these tools or a combination of these three tools is suitable for the use case in question. So then it comes to the point that it is very important to know then when to use which tool. So which is exactly what we are going to be seeing in this slide. First, let me start with MuleSoft RPA. MuleSoft RPA is very useful for automating repetitive manual tasks which involve fetching some data from the UI or from some desktop application like Excel or a web browser. MuleSoft RPA should be considered as a last mile in a hybrid automation solution, meaning if there is a huge process of which 80% could be automated by other means, like, for example, building APIs or building composer flows, and the rest 20% remains untouched because it is not accessible using APIs, because the system to be automated is some legacy terminal system, right? In this case, MuleSoft RPA would be a very, very good option in order to also automate the last 20% using UI clicks and achieving end-to-end automation of the full process. MuleSoft RPA is also very useful if we have to automate processes that involve human in a loop, like some approval processes, or like some processes which involve a human to look at something that the robot had finished and then approve what the work done by the robot is, right? So in this cases, MuleSoft RPA is very, very useful. Moving on to MuleSoft Composer. And MuleSoft Composer is very useful for automating cloud-based software as a service systems, which are available as pre-built connectors in the Composer. Right now, Composer has a lot of connectors, including Zendesk, Workday, Slack, Teams, Gmail, Stripe, NetSuite, Salesforce, MuleSoft RPA, etc., etc. And the number of connectors also keeps growing every day. So if the integration you want to build involves one of these connectors, then it is best to go and use MuleSoft Composer. MuleSoft Composer and MuleSoft RPA both are very low code, no code automation tools where you can achieve automations by just dragging and dropping stuff into your flow. So this is mainly focused to enable your or your business departments in order to automate their own processes. Moving on to the last component, which is the Anypoint platform, which is a bit more technical when compared to RPA or Composer. Anypoint platform is used for implementing or transforming the middleware of a company using API-led connectivity, wherein you want to build reusable and compostable APIs, which would be accessed by many other applications or other APIs. So in this case, Anypoint platform is the best suitable product. It's equally important to know when to not use MuleSoft products so that we do not end up automating a use case with an not suitable component, right? So let me start with MuleSoft RPA. MuleSoft RPA should never be used in order to bypass approved APIs or security measures that are available within an organization. And it should also not be used to create point-to-point integrations, because in this case, Composer would be more of a fit. And as said earlier, RPA is used as a last mile when no other automation possibilities are feasible. And also RPA and Composer, both of them are not suitable for high volume data transfer. In this case, APIs are better suited option. Moving on to Composer. Composer supports, as of now, only cloud-based software as a service systems, so integrating on-premise systems is currently not possible. And also Composer is useful when we have simple, straightforward integrations. If your integration involves very complex data manipulation and data transformation, then it is better to use Anypoint. Moving on to Anypoint platform. Anypoint platform should not be used to consume any data from user interfaces, because RPA is a more suitable tool over here. And also, if the integration involves connectors that are already available with Composer, then Composer should be given the priority. That's basically it. Then now that we know what tools are available within the MuleSoft automation package, we can go ahead and see what are the interaction mechanisms that are possible between these three tools. This slide gives a big overview on all the possible interaction mechanisms, but I would just skip this slide and go to the next one, because we would be focusing each one of these points in detail in the subsequent slides. First, we would be focusing on RPA and Composer combination. So first, the direction from Composer to RPA. Is it possible to call an RPA process from within a Composer flow, right? The answer is yes. So you have an RPA connector inside a composer flow, which you can use in order to invoke an RPA process. If you're using this option, you have two options to go for. One is to make either a synchronous call or an asynchronous call. This depends on the runtime of the RPA process. How a synchronous call would work is the composer flow is going to trigger the RPA process, wait for the RPA process to finish before continuing with the next task in the composer flow. This is important and is useful only when the RPA process returns or the finishes executing within 3 minutes. Then the composer flow would resume and then start execution from the next composer task. If in case your RPA process is very, very long running and it takes more than 3 minutes to finish, then it is better to go for an asynchronous call. So how the execution would look like for an asynchronous call is like below. Maybe I can go to the next slide to show you a little bit more in detail how it's going to look like. So an asynchronous call is going to have, for example, the MuleSoft RPA as a middle step in a composer flow. In this case, we are just going to invoke the RPA process, but are not going to wait until the RPA process finishes, but directly start executing the next step in the composer flow. The RPA process would continue execution in parallel. So now the question comes, how will I know that the MuleSoft RPA process has finished? And how will I know what is the output from the MuleSoft RPA process? So then you would have a second composer flow, which is waiting for the MuleSoft RPA process to finish. So it will keep polling the execution status of the process, and as soon as the process finishes executing, it would trigger this flow and it would start executing the subsequent steps in the second flow. This is how an asynchronous call would look like. I will quickly show you in the composer how to build such a flow. So this is a flow that is created new in composer. And when you are starting the flow, as you can see, it's all very intuitive, drag and drop. So you just have to choose something, not much complex coding involved when you're trying to build something in the composer. So the first step is, how do you want to start this flow? In this case, let's just say we just want to trigger the flow every 15 minutes, right? And then the next step is I want to call a MuleSoft RPA process. And you can see these are the connectors, the various connectors that are available within the composer and which are available for you to use. So for example, let me now select, according to our use case, the MuleSoft RPA as a connector. And let me select the process that I want to call from RPA, which is this. And now I have two options. This depends on whether I want to use this as a synchronous or an asynchronous call. If I want to use it as a synchronous call, I'm going to use the second option, use response in this flow, knowing that my RPA process is going to finish in 3 minutes. And let's say I have some other integration, for example, Slack, right? So how the execution is going to look like in this case is it is going to invoke the process, wait for the process to finish before executing the Slack step. This is how a synchronous call looks like. On the other hand, if I know my RPA process is going to be very long running, then I would choose the second option, which is poll the response from another flow. In this case, the the RPA process is going to be triggered, and at the same time, Slack is going to be executed, and the RPA process continues execution in parallel. These are the two integrations possible from Composer to RPA. Is this clear so far? Or if you have any questions, please feel free to just unmute yourself and then ask the question right then. Okay, if not, then I would move on to the next combination from RPA to Composer, the other way around, right? When you want to call a Composer flow from an RPA flow, then we would create the Composer flow as invocable. So how do we do that? Let me delete quickly whatever I have built before. So when we start a composer flow, we have a lot of options. One is to schedule it regularly during certain times, or you have a system event like we used before with MuleSoft RPA. Or the third option is to make the composer flow invocable, meaning that the composer flow can be invoked from any external system using a HTTP request, right? Once you build the flow, you publish the flow will give you a URL, the client ID and client secret, using which you can then invoke the composer flow from anywhere outside. MuleSoft RPA also being one of the options, right? And it also, you can see here, also has an option to return some output back to the calling system. So we are not just able to trigger and compose a flow, but also able to give back some output, which we can process then subsequently in however manner that we want. Going back. Yeah, so this is how once the flow is published, you will see here in flow credentials a URL, a client ID and client secret, which you can use inside the RPA REST call action step in order to call the composer flow. We would be seeing also a quick demo of this use case in our demo at the end. So that's it. We come to the end of the first combination involving RPA and composer, and we move on then to RPA and Anypoint. So from an Anypoint or a Mule application, it is possible to call an RPA process. You can use the RPA process as a connector within the Mule application when the RPA process is published to Anypoint Exchange as an API. How do you do it? Is in the MuleSoft RPA Manager. So this is my orchestrator for controlling all the RPA processes, and this is my RPA bot that I want to call from a Mule application, right? The first step that we have to do is make sure that the bot is in production mode. This one is already in production mode. And then you have two options, either to create a normal run configuration or an invocable run configuration. A normal run configuration would just trigger the bot in specific schedules that is already fixed and configured. If you create, on the other hand, an invocable run configuration, it can be triggered from anywhere on demand from any outside external system, right? So for us to publish our process as an API, we need to create an invocable run configuration. It is possible to have one invocable run configuration for every process, exactly one. And that is why the icon here is grayed out, because there is an invocable configuration that is already existing for this process, right? And once this configuration is created, we would see in our Anypoint Exchange the robot process, and which is published as an API, and it has a lot of methods like start process or get process execution status, which you can then use inside an Anypoint Mule application. How you use it in an Anypoint Mule application is, for example, in the small demo application, I have a normal HTTP listener, and I use this option search in Exchange, and I searched my robot process name, and then I was able to add it as a connector because it is already available in Exchange. And then I can use all these methods. So for example, I can use this in order to start the bot, or I can use this one in order to get the execution status of the bot. In this small demo case, I have here just a normal get status execution method where I'm trying to query the execution status of an execution that I triggered earlier, right? And how this would look like if I call it from Postman is like this. So as you can see, it is not just giving me the execution status, which was successful, but it is also returning the results from the RPA bot, meaning that the RPA bot also gives out some output, which we can then process further in our Mule application if we want to. Okay, coming back to the presentation. Then moving on to the next combination from RPA to Anypoint. It is same as how you invoke a composer flow. You just have a REST call action step where you configure the URL and the authentication and the headers and the query parameters, etc. And then you can use this nice other action step called JSON query in order to parse the JSON result that is returned by the API and to extract the information exactly as you need it. This is also something that we would be showing in the demo later. Finally, the last combination, Composer and Anypoint. So it is possible to call Anypoint APIs from within a Composer flow. So you can use the straightforward option, which is using a HTTP connector to just give a HTTP GET or a PUT or a POST request to the Anypoint API. Or the second option is using API sharing. API sharing is a methodology in which the IT teams create the APIs and share it with the business teams so that it is available for them in their Composer flows and they can use it as and when needed in their automations, right? So this is also an option if it is enabled. You can go for API sharing to call an API from Composer. If it is not enabled, then you can use a normal HTTP connector. How API sharing looks like is below. So let me quickly delete this and just add a scheduler. Yeah, so here when you go for system action and when API sharing is enabled in your organization, then you would see here a section called shared APIs. And whichever APIs Composer has access to will be shown over here. And then you can choose that API and it will show you what methods are available or allowed in the API. And you can just choose the one that you want to use and then pass on or configure the other parameters like the query parameters and headers and authentication, etc. over here. If API sharing is not enabled, then you can just use a normal HTTP request in order to create your connection and then just put, if it's a GET connection, and give the path and everything, and then configure it from the scratch. Yeah, that's it. These are the two options for calling an Anypoint API from Composer. And the last and final combination is from Anypoint to Composer the other way around, which is also by using a simple HTTP request within your Mule application and publishing your Composer flow as invocable. With this, we come to the end of the theory part and go on to the interesting demo case. So if you guys have any questions, please feel free to just stop me in the middle. Then before we actually see the live demo, I would like to give a short overview on what our demo case is built for. So we have a hypothetical company which wants to check customer orders above a certain order limit, order value, in order to reduce the placement of fraudulent orders, right? So due to the high volume of orders, they want to automate this process as quick as possible. And how this process is manually done is that they check the customer's payment history, and depending on whether they have paid their payments on time or if they have a lot of open payments still, it is decided whether to approve the order automatically or it must be passed on then to a human to do manual approval. This is how the demo case is going to look like, and this is the scenario that we must automate. And how the infrastructure is set up in the company is the order data is available in a Snowflake database, on cloud, and there is the payment data which is available in a CRM system, but the CRM system is a legacy terminal based system where API connectivity is not possible. And finally, they have also a ticketing system which is Jira. So how the automation solution is going to look like. Here on the left hand side, we have Snowflake where the order data resides. We have here an Anypoint API which is going to fetch orders from Snowflake, and also there is a put endpoint which is going to update the status of the order back to Snowflake. This is built completely using Anypoint platform. And then there is a robot process which is built using MuleSoft RPA and which is going to call this API to fetch the open orders from Snowflake, and it is going to log in to this legacy terminal based CRM system and do the checks on the customer's payment, right? And once it does, the CRM system gives out a fraud score for each customer. And depending on the fraud score, the RPA bot decides whether an order must be automatically approved, in which case it is going to directly call our API and update the order status in Snowflake. Or if the order has to be checked more by a human, then it is going to flag the order and it is going to call a composer flow, which is then going to use Jira to create tickets and assign it to responsible person. And on the same time, it is also going to, the composer flow is also going to update the status and the ticket number back to Snowflake using our API. As you can see, we are then using a combination of all the three components in order to effectively automate the process almost end to end. Then I would move on to the live demo. First, let me show you the API that is built in Anypoint. Which is this one. And you can see that there's two methods. One is a get, which is used for getting all the orders depending on a particular status. So I can query, for example, the processing orders. There is no authentication as of now, so I'm leaving client ID and client secret empty. And you can see this is a result from the API, which is fetching from Snowflake all the orders which are in processing status, right? I can also show you the Snowflake instance, and this is how the order table looks like. And as you can see, these are the three results that are fetched by the API, these three orders which are in processing state. And then also in the API is a put method, which is going to help us to update order status for a particular order. For this, we have to pass the order ID and the status that we want to update the order with. This is the API that would be called then in the RPA bot. So this is the RPA bot. It has three steps. One is first to call our API that I just showed and to fetch all the processing orders. So you have here the base URL, which is the URL of the API. And in this case, the method is get. And I do not have any authentication or any body to pass, so there is nothing else to be configured. So if I hit send, it is going to return the exact results that we saw from the Anypoint exchange. It's going to fetch me only the processing orders. And after that, I'm going to use a JSON query action step in order to filter the JSON result and extract only the customer ID from the JSON response. Why only the customer ID is because this is the key that we want to be entering inside our CRM system in order to fetch the customer's details and check the fraud score of the customer, which is what we would be doing in this particular step. So it is going to open the CRM system, so with GUI clicks, and once the CRM system is open, and it is going to enter the customer ID, check the fraud score of the customer, And if the fraud score is equal to 0, then there is no Jira ticket that has to be raised, and it can directly use our API, but in this case, put method, to update the status of the order to approved. But on the other hand, if there is a fraud score which is greater than 1, then there is a need to be creating a Jira ticket. So this case, it would call our composer flow, and then it would pass on as a body a lot of information from RPA to composer. For example, like the order ID, the customer ID, and also the fraud score that RPA has read from the CRM system and from the API would be passed on to Composer, and Composer can then create a Jira ticket with these details, right? So this is basically the RPA flow. The last step is just to log off from the CRM system. And then finally, how our Composer is going to look like. Yeah, so this is a Composer flow that will be creating the Jira ticket for us. And as explained before, because I have to call this flow from RPA, I am making this flow invocable. And the second step is to use the Jira connector and then create a ticket or an issue using some pre-configured stuff. So for example, I want to create my issue in this particular project, and I have to make sure that it is of type problem and the status is open and the priority is high, etc. And I want in the text of the ticket also some data that is given to me by the calling system, in this case, the RPA process. So the RPA process would give me also the order ID, which I want to have in the heading of the Jira ticket. And then in the body, I also want to have the customer ID and the fraud score given by the RPA system. And finally, I want to assign a responsible person. And once this Jira ticket is created, I want to use API sharing as shown before and our put method in the API to update the order status of this particular order to pending approval, right? So that's why I'm using here the customer orders put method. And as a final step, I want to return the ticket number that is created in Jira back to my RPA process, so that the RPA process can then log the ticket number, and it can also know whether the ticket was created successfully or not. So this is going to be our end-to-end flow. And now let me quickly run the demo. So as explained before, our RPA is going to be the starting point. Now the RPA process is running. It is now calling the Snowflake API, which is in our Anypoint platform, and it has now fetched all the processing orders. And now it is going to open the CRM system. This is just a legacy terminal-based system, and it is going to enter now the customer ID. And you can see here that the fraud score is 2 for this particular customer, meaning that a ticket has to be generated. And it is going to generate this JSON body and pass on to the composer, and the composer has given us back the Jira ticket number. So that's it. One customer has finished processing, and then it moves on to the next customer. And again, it is going to enter the customer ID, which is 4 in this case. But in this case, the fraud score is 0. So it is not going to take any action in Jira, but it is going to update the order directly in Snowflake, also via our Anypoint platform API. And then I guess there is one more left. So again, enter the customer ID. Yeah, which is 7 in this case, and it has a fraud score 1, meaning a Jira ticket has to be created. So it is constructing the body, passing this information to Composer, and Composer is giving back the Jira ticket number. So it has now finished processing all the open orders. So it is now just going to end the process, log off from CRM, so that there is a graceful completion of all the applications involved. That's it. So now let me show you how the Jira board is going to look like. As you can see, it was initially empty, and now if I refresh, there are two tickets for the two orders which had the frauds more than one. And if I go inside the ticket, I can see that the order ID is passed on from the RPA system, the customer ID is passed on from the RPA system, and so is a fraud score. And afterwards, if I go to Snowflake and if I refresh the preview of my orders table, I can see that these two orders have now the status pending approval, and it has now also have a ticket number updated against them so that it is possible to then check the status later of this ticket. That's basically the end of the demo, and you can see now how in this case then we have automated with a combination of Anypoint, RPA and Composer the process almost end to end, and how we are also seamlessly able to pass data between all of these three tools to kind of construct an end-to-end use case using the correct tools for the correct use cases. So we come to then to the end of the session. So that's it from my side. So if you guys have any questions, then feel free to just ask now.
Yeah, if anyone has any question, you can unmute and ask. We'll wait for 5 minutes.
I see some questions in the chat. Or Shubham, you have already answered it.
Mhm.
Okay.
Hi, hey, hi. The only in the use cases, right? We know the
Mhm.
most of the things we can done by the API also, right?
Yes.
So I just wanted to understand. I mean, what the reason we have used the RPM there? It is just to connect to the legacy system terminal and so how that all process is going on.
Yeah, exactly. So if RPA is a good option if any of the other automation possibilities is not feasible for a use case. Like for example, in this one, where we have a legacy system where we cannot build APIs to access the system, then the only option remains is to access the data that the system has via UI interactions. So in this case, then RPA is the best fit, right? Or the only option for that matter. And Composer will come into the picture when you want to enable not just your IT to automate processes, but also your business departments. Anypoint platform is very, very technical. So in order to build an API, you need to know or have a lot of technical expertise, right? But when you want to build automations using Composer, it is easy to just drag and drop and then pass data back and forth between the systems that we want. So this enables even business departments to also build their own quick automations instead of relying on the IT to do everything for them. This would increase the automation percentage within an organization. Does that answer your question, Neeraj?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay,
Thank you.
yeah, you're welcome.